The house was eerily quiet as I stepped through the front door. I had just pulled a double shift at the hospital, and all I wanted was to collapse on the couch. But as I headed down the hallway, a burst of laughter, my mother's laughter, stopped me in my tracks. It had been years since I'd heard that sound, genuine and full of life. Curiosity got the better of me, so I followed the sound to the living room. And there he was. Alex, my mom's best friend, and the man I hadn't seen since I was a teenager. He looked exactly how I remembered him, only more put together, confident, handsome even. "Look who decided to show up," my mom exclaimed, eyes sparkling as she waved me over. "Jake, you remember Alex, don't you?" Of course, I replied, forcing a smile as I extended my hand to him. His grip was firm, warm, a touch too familiar for someone I hadn't seen in years. "Alex," I nodded. "It's been a while." "Too long," he said, pulling me into a hug instead of the handshake I had expected. The smell of his cologne, something woodsy, with a hint of spice, lingered in my nose as he held on for just a second too long. When he finally let go, I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, an unexpected flutter that I quickly dismissed. "How's life treating you?" he asked, settling back on the couch next to my mom. "Can't complain," I replied, trying to sound casual, as if I hadn't just felt a jolt of something I couldn't quite name. "What brings you back to town?" "Here for a conference," he said, his eyes lingering on me in a way that made the air feel heavier. "Thought I'd drop by and catch up." "Glad you did," I said, more to myself than to him, as I took a seat across from them. My mother was already diving into a story about some neighborhood gossip, but I wasn't really listening. My eyes kept drifting back to Alex, to the way he smiled, the way he smiled, the way he seemed so at ease. And then it hit me, this was going to be one hell of a visit. The next few days passed in a blur, with Alex staying at our place, as if he had never left. My mom was thrilled to have him around, and to be honest, so was I. We spent hours catching up, reminiscing about old times, but there was something different in the air now, something that hadn't been there before. One evening, after dinner, my mom excused herself to bed early, leaving Alex and me alone in the living room. The TV was on, but neither of us was watching it. The silence between us wasn't uncomfortable, but it was charged with an unspoken tension that had been building since the moment he walked back into my life. "So how's work been?" Alex asked, breaking the silence as he poured us both a glass of wine. "Busy," I replied, taking the glass he offered. "The hospital's been crazy lately. Long hours, lots of stress." I took a sip, trying to ignore how close he was sitting. I could feel the heat of his body, and it was doing strange things to my head. "Sounds intense," he said, his voice low, almost a murmur. He leaned back, his gaze steady on me. "I've missed this, Jake, just sitting and talking like we used to." "Me too," I admitted, feeling the warmth of the wine settle in my stomach. The words came out before I could stop them. "It's been too long." Our eyes met, and for a moment I could feel the world narrowing down to just the two of us. The space between us felt like it was shrinking, and I had this insane urge to close it completely. But I didn't move. Neither did he. Instead, we just sat there, caught in a moment that was teetering on the edge of something more. "So what's new with you?" I asked, trying to steer the conversation back to safer ground. Alex shrugged, his gaze finally breaking away from mine as he looked down at his glass. "Not much, really. Work's been keeping me busy. Life's been fine, I guess." "Just fine," I pushed, sensing there was more he wasn't saying. He looked up at me again, and there was something in his eyes, something heavy. "Yeah," he said quietly, "just fine." Before I could ask anything else, he downed the rest of his wine and stood up. "I think I'll call it a night," he said, his tone casual, but there was an undercurrent there that I couldn't quite place. "See you in the morning." "Yeah," I replied, still sitting there with my half-empty glass, feeling like I'd just missed something important. "Good night, Alex." "Good night, Jake," he said, giving me one last look before he disappeared down the hallway to the guest room. I sat there for a long time after he left, the tension between us still hanging in the air. Something had shifted tonight, something subtle but undeniable. And I had a feeling it was just the beginning. The following day, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was building between Alex and me, something that neither of us was willing to acknowledge outright. We went through the motions: breakfast, small talk, even a trip to the grocery store, but underneath it all, there was this undercurrent of tension, like a storm gathering strength. That night, After my mom had gone to bed, it was just the two of us again. This time we ended up on the back porch, the warm night air wrapping around us as we sat in silence, each lost in our thoughts. I could feel his presence beside me, the way his knee brushed against mine, sending little shocks up my leg. "Do you ever think about how things could have been different?" Alex's voice broke the silence, his words hanging in the air between us. Different, how I asked, my heart skipping a beat as I turned to look at him. His face was partially hidden in the shadows, but I could see the way his eyes glinted in the low light. "If we hadn't lost touch," he said, his voice softer now, almost hesitant. "If we'd stayed close all these years." I didn't know what to say to that, so I just nodded, the truth of his words settling heavily in my chest. "Yeah, I think about it sometimes," I admitted. "A lot, actually." He didn't respond right away, just sat there staring out into the night. When he finally spoke, his voice was so quiet, I almost didn't hear him. "I've missed you, Jake, more than I realized." The words sent a jolt through me, and before I could second-guess myself, I reached out, my hand finding his in the dark. His fingers were warm, and he didn't pull away. We sat like that for a long moment, the silence between us charged with something electric. Then, almost without thinking, I leaned in. My heart was pounding, my breath coming in short, quick bursts, but I couldn't stop myself. I didn't want to stop. His face was inches from mine, and I could feel the heat radiating off his skin, could see the way his eyes flicked down to my lips. "Jake," he murmured, but he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. I closed the distance between us, my lips brushing against his in a tentative kiss. For a heartbeat, neither of us moved, as if we were both afraid to shatter whatever fragile thing was forming between us. But then, slowly, he kissed me back, his lips pressing more firmly against mine. It was soft at first, just a gentle exploration, but it didn't stay that way for long. The kiss deepened, grew more urgent, more demanding, until we were clinging to each other, our breaths mingling in the night air. When we finally pulled apart, we were both breathless, our foreheads resting against each other. I could feel his heartbeat against my chest, strong and fast, matching my own. "Jake," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "we need to talk about this." "Yeah," I agreed, still trying to catch my breath. "But not tonight." He nodded, his hand still wrapped around mine. "Not tonight," he echoed, and we both knew that whatever this was between us, it was just the beginning. The next morning, the tension from the night before was still there, hanging between us like a thick fog. We both tried to act normal, but it was impossible to ignore what had happened. Every glance, every brush of the hand felt charged, electric, like we were both playing with fire and daring the other to strike the match. My mom didn't seem to notice anything out of the ordinary, thankfully. She went about her usual routine, oblivious to the undercurrent between Alex and me. But I couldn't stop thinking about that kiss, how right it had felt, and how wrong it could all go if we weren't careful. Alex and I spent the day together, but there was an unspoken agreement to avoid what had happened the night before. We filled the hours with mundane tasks, running errands, fixing things around the house, but the tension kept building, a silent pressure cooker waiting to explode. That evening after dinner, my mom retired early again, leaving us alone in the living room. The silence stretched between us, thick and heavy, until Alex finally broke it. "So, about last night," he began, his voice steady, but I could see the uncertainty in his eyes. "Let's not overthink it," I said quickly, not wanting to ruin whatever fragile connection we had. "It happened. We can't take it back, but we don't have to make it a big deal." He looked at me for a long moment, his gaze searching mine. "Is that what you really want? To just pretend it didn't happen?" I hesitated, unsure of how to answer. Part of me wanted to dive in headfirst, to see where this thing between us could go, but another part of me, maybe the smarter part, knew that this was dangerous territory. "I don't know," I admitted, finally. "But I know I don't want to lose what we have." "And what is that, exactly?" he asked, leaning forward, his eyes locked on mine. "Friendship," I said, though the word felt inadequate. "We've known each other for so long, Alex. I don't want to mess that up." "But what if it's more than that?" he pressed, his voice low, almost a whisper. Before I could respond, he reached out, his hand resting on my knee, the touch sending a shiver up my spine. It was such a simple gesture, but it felt like so much more. My breath caught in my throat as I looked at him, the air between us crackling with unspoken possibilities. "Jake," he said, his voice serious. We can't keep playing this game. Sooner or later, it's going to catch up with us. I knew he was right. This wasn't just some innocent flirtation, it was something deeper, something that could change everything if we let it. But I wasn't ready to face that yet, to admit just how much I wanted this, how much I wanted him. "You're right," I said finally, my voice barely more than a whisper. "But I don't know what to do." His hand tightened on my knee, his eyes intense as he looked at me. "Then let's take it slow," he suggested. "Figure it out together. No pressure, no expectations." "Okay," I agreed, feeling a strange mix of relief and anticipation. "We'll take it slow." But even as I said the words, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were playing a dangerous game, one that neither of us knew how to win. Days turned into a week, and Alex and I continued our dangerous dance around each other. We kept our promise to take things slow, but the tension between us only grew. It was like a tightrope stretched to its breaking point, and every glance, every accidental touch, added to the strain. One afternoon, we found ourselves alone in the kitchen. My mom had gone out to run some errands, leaving us with the pretense of baking something, though neither of us was really focused on the task. I could feel his presence beside me, the warmth of his body, the way his shoulder brushed against mine as we moved around the cramped space. "Hand me the flour," I asked, my voice coming out more strained than I intended. He reached for it, but instead of passing it to me, he paused, turning to look at me with that same intensity that had become so familiar. "Jake," he said, his voice low, "we can't keep pretending this isn't happening." I knew exactly what he meant, but I wasn't ready to face it. "We're just baking, Alex," I said, forcing a laugh, though my heart was pounding in my chest. "Is that what this is?" he asked, setting the flour down on the counter, his eyes locked on mine. "Because it feels like a lot more." I swallowed hard, trying to find anything to say that wouldn't make things worse, but before I could come up with a response, he closed the distance between us in one swift motion. His hand cupped the side of my face, his thumb brushing lightly against my cheek, and all the air seemed to leave the room. "We keep saying we'll take it slow," he murmured, his breath warm against my skin. "But I don't think I can anymore." "Alex," I whispered, but whatever I was going to say was lost as he leaned in, his lips capturing mine in a kiss that was anything but tentative this time. It was deep, hungry, and filled with a desperation that matched my own. All the tension that had been building between us exploded in that moment, and I found myself kissing him back with just as much intensity. His hand slid down to my waist, pulling me closer until there was no space left between us. The world outside the kitchen disappeared, leaving just the two of us tangled in a kiss that was both a confession and a release. My fingers dug into his shoulders as I let myself get lost in the feel of him, the way he tasted, the way his body felt pressed against mine. We broke apart, gasping for air, but he didn't let me go. His forehead rested against mine, and I could feel his breath, ragged and uneven, mixing with my own. "This isn't just a fling, Jake," he said, his voice rough, filled with something that scared me as much as it excited me. "This is real, and I need you to know that." I looked up at him, my heart still racing, my thoughts a chaotic mess. "I know," I replied, and I meant it. I had known it for a while now, but hearing him say it out loud made it real in a way that was both terrifying and exhilarating. "Then let's stop pretending," he said, his hand still holding my face, his eyes searching mine for any sign of hesitation. "Let's stop playing games and just be." For a moment I didn't answer. I just stood there, feeling the weight of everything we were risking, everything we were about to dive into headfirst. But then, without thinking, I nodded. "Okay," I said, my voice steady. "No more pretending." He smiled, and it was like the sun breaking through the clouds. "No more pretending," he echoed before pulling me into another kiss, this one slower, more deliberate, but no less intense. And just like that, the line we'd been so careful not to cross was behind us, and there was no going back. After that kiss in the kitchen, things changed between us. There was no more pretending, no more hiding behind excuses. We spent every moment we could together, the connection between us growing stronger with each passing day. But with that closeness came the looming threat of discovery, and the reality of what we were risking started to sink in. One evening after another long day at the hospital, I came home to find Alex waiting for me in the living room. My mom was out again, and the house was quiet, the kind of quiet that usually meant something was about to go wrong. Hey, I greeted him, trying to keep my tone light as I tossed my keys on the table. But something about the way he was sitting rigid, his hands clasped tightly together, told me that this wasn't going to be just another quiet night in. We need to talk, Jake, he said, his voice serious, cutting through the tension like a knife. My stomach dropped. I knew this conversation was coming, but that didn't make it any easier to face. What's going on? I asked, forcing myself to take a seat next to him. He didn't look at me right away, his eyes focused on the floor as if gathering his thoughts. When he finally did meet my gaze, I could see the conflict there, the worry that mirrored my own. Your mom, he started, his voice hesitant. She's going to figure it out, Jake. If she hasn't already. The words hit me like a punch to the gut, but I couldn't deny the truth in them. We'd been careful, at least. We thought we had, but the closeness, the way we were around each other now, it was only a matter of time before she put the pieces together. What are you saying? I asked, even though I already knew. I'm saying we need to tell her, he said, his eyes searching mine for some sign of agreement. Before she finds out on her own. It'll be better if it comes from us. The idea of sitting down with my mom and explaining everything made my chest tighten with fear. She'd always been supportive, but this was different. And what if she doesn't take it well? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Alex reached out, his hand finding mine, squeezing it gently. Then we deal with it together. But we can't keep sneaking around like this. It's not fair to her, or to us. I knew he was right. We couldn't keep living in this bubble, pretending that what we were doing didn't have consequences. But that didn't make the decision any easier. I don't want to lose her, I confessed, the fear laced through my words. You won't, Alex assured me, his voice firm. She loves you, Jake, and she'll love you no matter what. But we have to be honest with her. I nodded, though the fear still gnawed at my insides. Okay, I said, finally, we'll tell her. His relief was palpable, and he pulled me into a tight embrace, his arms wrapping around me like a safety net. We'll do it together, he murmured against my hair. No matter what happens, we'll face it together. As I held on to him, I couldn't help but wonder if this was the calm before the storm, if the fragile peace we'd found would shatter once the truth was out in the open. But I knew we couldn't keep hiding forever. The line had been crossed, and now there was no turning back. We just had to hope that when the dust settled, we'd still have each other. The next morning, the weight of our decision hung over us, like a storm cloud. We both knew what needed to be done, but neither of us wanted to be the one to pull the trigger. The day passed in a blur of mundane tasks, each of us pretending that everything was normal, but the tension was palpable, an unspoken countdown ticking away in the background. That evening after dinner, I caught my mom as she was clearing the table. Alex and I exchanged a glance, a silent agreement passing between us. It was time. Mom, I began, my voice steady, though my heart was pounding in my chest. Can we talk? There's something I need to tell you. She paused, looking up at me with a curious expression. Of course, Jake. What's on your mind? I glanced at Alex, who was standing by the counter, his face calm but his eyes intense. He nodded slightly, urging me to continue. I took a deep breath, trying to find the right words. It's about Alex and me, I started, the words feeling heavy as they left my mouth. We're not just friends, Mom, we're more than that. For a moment she just stood there, the dish she was holding forgotten in her hands. Her eyes darted between us, trying to process what I had just said. The silence stretched out, each second feeling like an eternity. More than friends, she finally echoed, her voice laced with confusion. Yes, I said, my voice firmer now. We're together, Mom. As in, we're in a relationship. The words hung in the air, the truth finally laid bare between us. I watched her face closely, searching for any sign of how she was taking the news. Her expression shifted from confusion to surprise, and then to something else, something I couldn't quite read. Jake, she began, her voice trembling slightly. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything right now, Alex interjected, stepping forward. We just wanted you to know the truth. We didn't want to keep this from you any longer. She looked at him, then back at me, her eyes wide with a mix of emotions. How long? She started, but her voice trailed off. Not long, I admitted, but it's real. And we didn't want to hide it from you. For a moment she just stood there, her eyes searching mine as if trying to make sense of it all. Then, slowly, she set the dish down on the table, her hands trembling slightly. I wasn't expecting this, she said, her voice barely more than a whisper. I know, I replied, my heart aching at the sight of her struggling to process everything. But this is important to me, Mom. Alex is important to me. She looked at Alex then, really looked at him, and I could see the wheels turning in her mind as she tried to reconcile the man she'd known for so long with the new reality we'd just dropped on her. And you're sure about this? She asked, her voice steadier now but still laced with uncertainty. Yes, I said without hesitation. I'm sure. She took a deep breath, her shoulders slumping slightly as she processed my words. Then, after what felt like an eternity, she nodded. I just want you to be happy, Jake, she said softly, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. That's all I've ever wanted. I felt a wave of relief crash over me, the tension that had been building for days finally starting to ease. Thank you, I said, my voice thick with emotion. That means everything to me. She gave me a small, shaky smile before turning to Alex. And you, she said, her voice regaining some of its usual firmness, you'd better take good care of him. Alex nodded, his expression serious. I will, I promise. For the first time since the conversation began, the room felt lighter, as if the storm had passed and left a calm in its wake. My mom stepped forward, pulling me into a tight hug, and I could feel the love and acceptance in that embrace, even if it was still tinged with uncertainty. When she finally let go, she gave Alex a nod, a silent acknowledgement of the new dynamic between us. I'm going to need some time to get used to this, she admitted, her voice wry but warm. Take all the time you need, I said, my heart swelling with gratitude and love. As she headed to her room, leaving Alex and me alone in the kitchen, I turned to him, the tension in my chest finally easing. We did it, I said, a small smile tugging at my lips. He pulled me into a hug, his arms wrapping around me like a lifeline. Yeah, he murmured against my hair. We did. But even as I held on to him, I knew this was just the beginning. The truth was out, but the real challenges were still ahead. In the days following our conversation with my mom, things were tense, but there was a new sense of relief too. The secret was out, and even though it wasn't easy, at least we weren't hiding anymore. My mom tried to act normal, but I could see the effort it took. She was quieter than usual, often lost in thought, and I knew she was struggling to come to terms with everything. Alex and I gave her space, not wanting to push her too hard, too fast. We stuck to our usual routine, but the atmosphere in the house had changed. Every conversation felt like it was teetering on the edge of something bigger, something we were all trying to avoid. One evening, about a week after we'd told her, I found her sitting alone in the living room, staring out the window. The TV was on, but it was clear she wasn't paying attention to it. I hesitated in the doorway, unsure if I should interrupt, but something in her posture made me step forward. Hey, I said softly, taking a seat beside her. How are you holding up? She glanced at me, her eyes tired but warm. I'm okay, Jake, she said, offering me a small smile. Just thinking. I prompted, though I had a pretty good idea. About you, she admitted, turning back to the window. About everything. I want to be okay with this, Jake, and I think I will be, but it's a lot. I know, I said, reaching out to take her hand, and I'm sorry we dropped it on you like that. We just didn't want to hide anymore. She squeezed my hand, her grip strong despite the uncertainty I could feel in her. I understand why you did it, she said, and I'm glad you told me. It's just going to take some time. I nodded, feeling a pang of guilt for putting her in this position. We don't expect you to be okay with it right away, I said. We just want you to know that we're here, and we're not going anywhere. She looked at me then, her eyes softening. I know you're not, she said, her voice thick with emotion, and I'm proud of you, Jake, for being honest, for being brave. I just never saw this coming. I didn't either, I confessed, a small, rueful smile on my lips. But it's real, Mom. Alex and I, we're serious about this. She nodded, and I could see the resolve in her eyes as she processed my words. I just want to make sure you're happy, she said, echoing the sentiment she'd shared when we first told her. And if Alex makes you happy, then I'll find a way to accept it. He does, I said, my voice firm. He really does. She smiled, a real one this time, though it was still tinged with a bit of sadness. Then, that's all that matters, she said, leaning over to kiss my cheek. We sat in silence for a while after that, the tension between us slowly starting to ease. It wasn't perfect, and I knew it would be a while before things felt truly normal again, but it was a start. Later that night, after she'd gone to bed, I found Alex in the kitchen, cleaning up after dinner. He looked up as I walked in, his expression questioning. "How is she?" he asked, setting down the dish he was holding. "She's processing," I said, leaning against the counter. "But I think she's going to be okay." He nodded, a look of relief crossing his face. "That's good," he said, coming over to stand in front of me. "And you?" "I'm okay," I replied, feeling the truth of it as I said the words. "Better, actually. It's like we've crossed the hardest part, you know." He smiled, his hand reaching out to brush a strand of hair from my face. "Yeah, I know," he said softly. "And we'll get through the rest of it too, together." I leaned into his touch, feeling a warmth spread through me that hadn't been there in days. "Together," I echoed, and as he pulled me into his arms, I finally let myself believe it. The fallout was real, and the road ahead wasn't going to be easy. But we weren't hiding anymore, and that made all the difference. As the days turned into weeks, things began to settle into a new normal. My mom was slowly adjusting, and though there were still moments of awkwardness, I could see she was making an effort. Alex and I continued to grow closer, our relationship deepening in ways I hadn't expected. It felt like we were finally on solid ground, like we could breathe again. But just as I started to believe that we had weathered the storm, something new emerged, something I hadn't seen coming. It started with a phone call. I was at work, going through the usual motions of a busy day at the hospital, when my phone buzzed in my pocket. I glanced at the screen, seeing an unfamiliar number, but something told me to answer it. "Hello," I said, stepping into a quiet corner. "Jake?" Its Mom. Her voice was tense, strained in a way that immediately put me on edge. "Mom? What's wrong?" I asked, my heart rate picking up. "It's about Alex," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper, as if she didn't want anyone to overhear. "Something's come up. Something serious." Fear gripped me. "What is it?" I demanded, trying to keep my voice steady. "I don't want to talk about it over the phone," she said quickly. "Can you come home? We need to discuss this in person." I agreed without hesitation, telling my supervisor that I had a family emergency. The drive home was a blur of anxiety, my mind racing with possibilities. What could have happened? Why was my mom so worried? When I walked through the front door, I found her and Alex in the living room, both of them looking more tense than I'd ever seen. Alex stood as soon as I entered, his face a mask of concern. "What's going on?" I asked, my eyes darting between the two of them. Alex didn't answer right away. He looked at my mom, as if seeking permission to speak, and she gave him a small nod. He took a deep breath before finally meeting my gaze. "Jake," he began, his voice uncharacteristically shaky, "there's something I need to tell you. Something I should have told you a long time ago." My stomach twisted into a knot. "What is it?" He hesitated, and I could see the struggle in his eyes, the weight of whatever secret he was carrying. "Before I came back to town," he said slowly, I was involved with someone else." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I stood there, frozen, trying to process what he had just said. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "It wasn't serious," he added quickly, his voice desperate, "but it was complicated. And now, that person. They're causing problems. They've threatened to come here, to confront us, to make everything public." The room seemed to spin around me. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Why didn't you tell me?" I demanded, my voice rising. "Why didn't you say anything before?" "I didn't think it would matter," he said, his voice filled with regret. "I thought it was over, that it wouldn't affect us. But now it's become a threat." I turned to my mom, who was watching us with a pained expression. "Did you know about this?" I asked, needing to understand how deep this betrayal went. She shook her head quickly. "No, Jake, I just found out today. That's why I called you. I didn't want you to be blindsided." The room fell silent, the weight of Alex's confession hanging heavy in the air. I could feel the anger, the hurt, the betrayal swirling inside me, threatening to overwhelm me. Everything we had built, everything we had fought for, now seemed to be teetering on the edge of collapse. "What do we do now?" I asked finally, my voice hollow. "We face it together," Alex said, stepping closer, his eyes pleading with me to understand. "We deal with it head on, no more secrets. But I need you to trust me, Jake. I need you to believe that I'm committed to us, no matter what happens." I looked at him, at the man I had grown to love, and for the first time I wasn't sure what to say. The ground beneath us had shifted, and I wasn't sure if we could find our footing again. But as I stood there, I realized that this was the real test, the moment that would determine if we were strong enough to withstand the challenges ahead. "Okay," I said finally, my voice trembling but resolute. "We'll face it together." But deep down, I knew that nothing would ever be the same. The unexpected challenge had thrown everything into chaos, and now we were left to pick up the pieces if we could. Beat 10, the resolution. The days following Alex's confession were some of the hardest I'd ever faced. The tension between us was palpable, and for the first time I found myself doubting everything we had built. But despite the betrayal I felt, despite the anger simmering just below the surface, I couldn't walk away. We had come too far, fought too hard, to let this be the end. The confrontation with Alex's past was inevitable. We knew it was only a matter of time before the person he'd been involved with showed up, and we needed to be ready. We spent those days really talking about everything. Alex was more open than he'd ever been, laying bare the mistakes he'd made, the fears that had driven him to keep this secret. And I, in turn, shared my own fears, my own doubts about where we stood. But through those conversations, something unexpected happened. We began to rebuild, to piece together the trust that had been shattered. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't immediate, but slowly we started to find our way back to each other. Then, the day came. The doorbell rang, and I felt my heart drop into my stomach. Alex and I exchanged a glance, a silent understanding passing between us. We were in this together. I opened the door to find a woman standing there, her expression hard, anger radiating off her in waves. She looked at Alex, then at me, her eyes narrowing. "So this is him?" she asked, her voice dripping with disdain. "Yes," Alex replied, stepping forward, his hand reaching for mine. "This is Jake, and whatever you came here to say, you can say it to both of us." Her eyes flicked to our joined hands, and I saw something shift in her expression, something like hurt, but also resignation. I just wanted to know why she said, her voice softer now, but still edged with bitterness. "Why him? Why not us?" Alex squeezed my hand, drawing strength from our connection. "Because what I have with Jake is real," he said, his voice steady. "What we had. It was never meant to be more than what it was. I'm sorry if I hurt you, but this," he gestured between the two of us, "this is what I need. What I've always needed." For a long moment she just stared at him, and I could see the hurt in her eyes, the betrayal she felt. But then, slowly, she nodded. "I get it," she said, her voice hollow. "I don't like it, but I get it." She turned to leave, and for a moment, I felt a surge of relief. But then she paused, looking back at me. "Take care of him," she said, her tone softer now, almost pleading. "Don't let him hurt you like he did me." "I won't," I replied, my voice firm. "But I also know that he's trying to make things right. We both are." She nodded again, a small, sad smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. "Good luck," she said, and then she was gone, leaving us standing there in the doorway, the weight of the past finally lifting. When the door closed, I turned to Alex, who looked as if he'd been holding his breath the entire time. "Are you okay?" I asked, searching his face for any sign of what he was feeling. "I think so," he said, letting out a long breath. I didn't realize how much I needed that, how much I needed to face it, to let it go. I pulled him into my arms, holding him close, feeling the tension slowly drain out of him. "We did it," I murmured against his shoulder. "We faced it, and we're still here." "Yeah," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "We're still here." In that moment, I knew that we had crossed a threshold. The challenge we'd faced had tested us, pushed us to our limits, but it hadn't broken us. If anything, it had made us stronger, more certain of what we had. As we stood there wrapped in each other's arms, I realized that the storm had finally passed. The future was still uncertain, and there would be more challenges ahead, but we had faced the worst of it, and we had come out the other side together. No more secrets, no more lies. Just the two of us, ready to face whatever came next. Together.